these were not skeletons. These were the leavings. This was the offal of a feast. The friendly welcome of the elder Malachi. The hearty parables of Orin. The strange tapestry of Brenna the Weaver with its figures pulled misshapen from the deep. The meat in Martha's stew, a thing with no name but with a provenance I now understood. All of it came together in my mind, a constellation of terror whose shape was now revealed. This was not a harvest of the sea. It was a harvest of men. I turned from that place of bones and I ran. I clawed my way up the slick embankment, my hands gripping at the thorns of the gorse and at the wet and naked roots of trees, as if they were the hands of saviors held out to me from the living world. I burst from the ravine's edge and did not stop. I ran with the terror of a debased animal back to the false sanctuary of the mariner's rest, and a single thing was screaming in the meat of my brain. I must get off this island. I crashed through the guest house door and fled up the stairs. I slammed the door to my room and leaned my back against the wood. My eyes scanned the small confines of my room. One door. One window that gave out onto the square. My training was not made for this. This was a heresy of the flesh, a pagan rite as old as the rocks it was enacted upon. My radio. With hands that would not be still, I retrieved it from my bag. I raised its small antenna and thumbed the switch and pressed it to my ear. There was no squawk of the dispatcher's call. There was nothing. I turned the small black box over in my hands. And I saw it. At the base of the antenna, the wire was severed. A clean and precise cut. Some careful artisan of my doom had been in my room. While Orin filled my ears with his parables of the sea. While Martha set out her stews. While I had walked in my ignorance among the tombs of their making. I walked to the window, and through a crack in the lace I looked down upon the square. The spectacle of the festival was nearly prepared. The pyre stood mountainous in the dusk. The islanders moved about their work with the grim and purposeful industry of acolytes at their devotions. The smiles I had taken for welcome I now saw as the ravenous and serene masks of predators. I saw Malachi directing the final preparations, a high priest in his element. As if he felt the weight of my gaze, he looked up from his duties, and his eyes scanned the windows of the guest house. Our gazes met and held for a long second across that ordained space. He gave me a slow and placid nod. It was a benediction. It was a final and awful amen. For I was not the guest. I was the honored guest. I was the harvest. I remained in that room while the last of the light bled out of the sky. My mind scrabbled at ways to escape. Swim to the mainland? I'd freeze to death. Steal one of their boats? The islanders' boats would be guarded as such upon this holy night. There was nothing but the clothing on my back. My only path forward was to play along. I poured cold and dead water from the pitcher into the basin and put my face in it. In the clouded and weeping glass of the mirror I saw a ghost looking back. A pale face whose eyes held a terror I knew I must conceal behind some semblance of civility. I coached the pale man in the glass. You are just a visitor. You are eager for the festival. I descended the stair. Old Martha stood in the gloom of the lobby, polishing glasses. When she saw me she offered up a smile of such grotesque welcome that it was a thing of surpassing horror. "Ah, Detective Harper. There you are," she said. "I was beginning to worry you would sleep through the commencement feast. You must be hungry. Go on, join the others in the square. The fire will be lit soon. Find Malachi, he has saved you a seat of honor." I contrived a smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Martha." Outside the world had been remade by fire. Torches on high staves bled a guttering light onto the scene. The air was heavy with the sacramental odor of pine smoke and the rendering of fat from a massive pit near the fire. The islanders were gathered at long tables of rough-hewn timber, drinking from wooden cups and laughing a laugh that was not a sound of mirth but of a ravenous and primal joy. A knot of men made music on fiddles and drums. I moved through them. Orin clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Almost time, detective. You'll never see another night like this one." Brenna the Weaver smiled at me from the depths of some beatific trance. All of it was an act, and I the guest, for whom this final act was prepared for. I saw Malachi then. He stood like some ghastly pontiff at the head of the main table, a crown of dark ivy on his white hair. He motioned me toward him and I made my legs obey. "Alexander, my boy," he boomed, gesturing to the seat beside him. "I am so delighted you have joined us. I trust your day was illuminating." "Very scenic, yes, I managed. Excellent, he said. He turned and raised his cup, and a sudden and profound silence fell upon that place. People of the Perch, we gather tonight for the sacred harvest, as our forebears did, and their forebears before them. We thank the unending sea for the bounty it brings to our shores. A great and terrible baying rose from the assembly. And we thank the drifting souls who find their way here, he continued, and his cold eyes found mine and held them, who nourish our traditions and give of themselves so that our community may survive another year. The crowd roared, their faces a gallery of feverish and contorted masks in the firelight. They raised their cups to me. All of them. And Malachi turned to me, and in the din his voice was a whisper of venom and benediction for me alone. It is a great honor you provide us, Detective Harper. The greatest honor we can bestow. You are now truly a part of our island story. Forever. Platters of rendered meat and steaming roots were passed down the long boards of the tables. One was set before me, a charnel bounty piled high upon the plate, and I could not look at it. First you will eat with us, Malachi said, and his voice was of a silken and dreadful honey but with a subtext of iron. It is tradition that the guest partakes. They were going to wait until I was full and slow. I picked at the flesh with my fork, and the ghastly ruse was the only thing between my life and the pyre that awaited it. Tell me, Malachi, I said, and I marveled at the steadiness of my own voice as it came forth from my throat. The ceremony itself. When does that happen? What am I to expect? His smile widened. Patience, my boy. After the feast comes the music, then the dance. A spiral dance, winding to the very center of the square. That is where we show our ultimate gratitude. At the foot of the fire, under the moon. My eyes courted the square. The fire and the torches were the world's only light, and beyond their bleeding circles lay the utter blackness of the cliffs and the docks. It was the only way out of that lit and holy hell. Then came the dispensation for which I had not dared to pray. A man burdened with a roasted leg stumbled, and his platter crashed upon the earth with a wet and greasy clap. A momentary confusion took hold as men rushed to the small ruin, and their bodies formed a brief and chaotic screen between Malachi and myself. My mind surrenders its claim, and my body acted upon its own terrible ordinance. I shoved the great weight of the table and sent Malachi's cup spilling its dark wine across his lap. He sputtered a curse. I was over the bench and into the shadows before the first cry went up. The guest is leaving, a woman shrieked. Don't let him reach the docks. The frantic music of the feast was strangled in an instant, and in its place there rose a bestial clamor and the percussion of heavy boots upon the hardpan. I ran as I had not run since I was a boy who feared ghosts in the dark, and now the ghosts were real and at my back. I ran through the warren of lanes and between the salt-eaten cottages, and their knowledge of the place was offset by the pure and animal fury of my flight. I hid myself behind a stack of cordwood and held my breath as two fishermen passed, their faces limned with a righteous anger, and then I ran again toward the sound and the smell of the sea. The docks. I broke from the last line of the houses and saw the harbor. A few boats sat tied fast in the black water, their familiar forms of no use to me. And then I saw it. Churning slow from the far pier was a light, and I heard the slow and steady systole and diastole of a diesel engine. It was a mainlander's boat, a trawler hugging the dark shore. It was my only hope. There he is. A roar from the blackness behind me. A clot of men bearing torches broke from the village, and at their head was Oren, his face raw, filled with the intent of murderous sacrament. They would be on me before I could reach the pier. I did the only thing that was left to a man in my extremity. I scrambled down the rock face at the harbor's edge, my hands shredded on the shells and the stone. I fell into the water, and the shock of such lethal cold seized the very heart in my chest. And I swam. I put my head down and crawled through the black and frigid water, my strength a coin I spent with every stroke, my arms reaching for that single receding light. The shouts at my back turned to curses, and then to silence. They did not follow. They were content to commend my soul to the sea's cold ministry. The sea did its work. My limbs were things of lead and my lungs were filled with fire. And as the last of my strength left me, as I prepared to give myself to the deep, my flailing hand struck something hard and unyielding. The hull. A rope ladder hung down its side. With my fingers I hooked them through the rungs and I pulled myself from the water and came to be on the scaly and reeking deck of the boat. I collapsed and drew air into my lungs in great ragged gasps as the lights of Cormorant's Perch, the lights of that ordained and hellish feast, dwindled to a fading constellation of malevolent light upon the black and endless waters. And I was alive. The fisherman who pulled me from the black water looked upon me as if I were a shade dredged up from the seafloor, a thing not meant to return to the world of men. He gave me a blanket that reeked of fish and salt and the great and abiding rot of the ocean, and pointed the nose of his trawler toward the mainland's distant lights. I offered a broken telling of a boating accident, and he did not question it, for the animal terror in my eyes was a testament older than any words. In the clean and well-lit rooms of the station house my story sounded like madness. They listened with the concern of men who hear a confession for a sin they cannot comprehend. I gave them my testimony. Finn's whisper. The charnel ground of the cove. The sabotaged radio. My flight from that ordained feast. They sent a Coast Guard chopper to circle that rock. The report came back and said everything was normal. A fishing village. Quiet people. There was no proof, for this evil was a thing that left no proof, only a profound and terrible absence. Sergeant O'Malley was a bull of a man whose faith was in the solidity of the world, and my story was a heresy against his church. Hypothermia, exhaustion, he declared, his voice a sermon for the bullpen. Couple that with some of their home-brewed poison and you hallucinated the whole damn thing, Harper. Get a grip. For a week I sat in that purgatory of paperwork, and every time I closed my eyes the world dissolved into the grey shingle of the cove and the pale and horrid glimmer of bone in the sand. Every shadow wore the face of Malachi, his smile a placid benediction upon my damnation. I was a man who had seen God's monstrous other half, and they called me mad for it. Then on a morning like any other the telephone on the main desk rang. I saw O'Malley emerge from his office reading a slip of paper, and his face was a study in irritation. Unbelievable, he said, and he stopped at my desk. Get this. Another domestic complaint from your precious island getaway. Sir? I asked, and I rose from my chair though my legs were made of straw. Noise complaint. Boyfriend and a girlfriend this time, apparently. Some young couple named Thorne. Just moved over from the mainland 6 months ago, looks like. Neighbor is reporting yelling, screaming. The whole 9 yards. Standard procedure, he said, turning toward a rookie named Peterson, a boy so young his piety for the badge was still upon him. Peterson. You're up. The air went out of me. Sergeant, no, I said. No sir, you can't. He turned back and his brows were a furrowed and angry line. Can't what, Harper? Can't do my job? Can't send an officer to a simple public disturbance call. You don't understand, sir. It's a lure. It's not a real dispute, I said, stepping toward him. It's how they do it. It's how they get someone out there. First my call, now this one. Don't you see the pattern? You can't send him. Detective, that is enough, he said. You have your own conspiracy theories, that's fine. Deal with them on your own time. But you will not interfere with police business based on some fever dream you had. Peterson is a capable officer. He doesn't carry your baggage. He gave me a last look of dismissal. Now get back to your desk. He turned his back on me. The sentence was passed. I returned to my place and I watched as Peterson, young and doomed and eager to prove his worth, grabbed the keys to his patrol car. And Peterson, O'Malley called out to him. It's the Perch. No sidearm. Just keep the peace. The boy gave a nod full of a terrible and unknowing confidence. He cast a look of pity upon me as he passed, the sane man pitying the seer, and then he walked out into the light of the day. That was 3 days ago. Peterson never activated his radio. The rock has gone mute out there in the grey expanse of the water. He has not come back. And I know with a dreadful and certain gnosis that he never will. The great and terrible wheel has turned, the old blood sacrifice is paid, and the harvest is come again. And I who had seen the awful workings of the oracle was now just another soul damned to watch it happen.